By 1936, Amelia Earhart was one of the most famous people in the world. Not just an idol to young women and little girls, but a genuine folk hero who had become famous not for being beautiful or having a hit song or movie. She had manifested a life of adventure and excitement. She had worked hard and made many sacrifices. While historically speaking, it's questionable as to whether she ever found true happiness in her personal life, her professional life was filled with accomplishments that would go down in the history books. Amelia had been married since 1931 to George Putnam, her publisher and agent, although by her own admission, that was more of a professional arrangement to keep up appearances and generally make life easier. After getting married, they lived together, but in 1934, their house in Rye, New York, burned to the ground. Amelia lost almost all of her belongings and looked at the fire as an omen that maybe she should let go of the past and start anew. The couple purchased a home in Toluca Lake, California. Her husband, George, was doing work now with Paramount Pictures, and Amelia wanted to be closer to the Lockheed Aircraft Corporation. After all, they were building her a new airplane, one that would be bigger and more powerful than any she had ever flown before. And she would need it for her biggest adventure yet. Amelia would be the first woman to set a new world record flying around the world. Aviation has always been an extremely expensive endeavor. For Amelia's greatest flight yet, she would need to raise in excess of $1 million in today's money. And that was to cover the plane, fuel, mechanics, promotion, and she would have to hire a navigator and a radio operator. Of course, being one of the most famous celebrities in the world was not lost on Amelia. She had become very good friends with First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, and when Amelia needed a landing strip built on a remote island in the middle of the Pacific so she would have a place to refuel, all it took was a phone call to her friend Eleanor. President Roosevelt even offered Amelia a U.S. Coast Guard ship, the Itasca, to be at her disposal to help serve as a guide to help her find this 25-mile-long Howland Island, halfway between Hawaii and Australia. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, a small island would be a challenge to find under the best of circumstances. But with the right preparation, everything should go according to plan. March 17, 1937, Amelia and her navigator Fred Noonan and William Manning set out on the first leg of her round-the-world flight. The first part of this attempt was between Oakland, California, and Honolulu, Hawaii. From the very beginning, things didn't go as planned. It appeared the propeller hubs on the craft were off-kilter, and the plane shook violently at times. Yet Amelia was able to land in Hawaii, and the plane was serviced at the United States Navy's Luke Field at Pearl Harbor. 3 days later, the plane was ready, and so was Amelia. From Hawaii, they were to head for the small Howland Island, but as they taxied down the runway to take off, the front right tire blew out, and then the left landing gear collapsed. The plane almost started to cartwheel, but Amelia was able to bring it under control, still sustaining serious damage to the propellers and the undercarriage of the plane. It was almost as if the universe didn't want Amelia to make this flight. While the Electra 10E was being repaired, Earhart and Putnam secured additional funds and prepared for a second attempt, in which this time they would fly west to east. The second attempt began with an unpublicized flight from Oakland, California to Miami, Florida, and after arriving there, Earhart announced her plans to circumnavigate the globe. The flight's opposite direction was partially the result of changes in global wind and weather patterns along the planned route since the earlier attempt. There was also a change in the crew. William Manning, who was considered a very good radio operator, also having trained in Morse code and being a pilot himself, decided to drop out of the flight. There was speculation as to whether Amelia wanted to go with one less person and be allowed to carry more fuel in his place, or if Manning had dropped out due to his concerns with Amelia and her ability to fly a bigger two-engine plane for such a distance. After all, until now, Amelia had flown much smaller planes, and after the crack-up on the runway in Hawaii, some say Manning was concerned. Nevertheless, Earhart and Noonan departed Miami on June 1st, and after numerous stops in South America, Africa, the Indian subcontinent, and Southeast Asia, they arrived at Lae, New Guinea on June 29, 1937. At this stage, about 22,000 miles of the journey had been completed. The remaining 7,000 miles would be over the vast Pacific Ocean. It was on July 2nd, 1937, 10 a.m. to be exact, as Amelia and her navigator Fred Noonan took off from the airfield in Lae, New Guinea. Their Electra was loaded down with all the equipment they would need, not much food and water though, but 1,090 gallons of fuel. Just enough to get them to Holland Island with little room for error. Holland was just a sliver of land, approximately 6,500 feet long and 1,600 feet wide, approximately 1/20th of the size of the island of Manhattan. Just barely enough to land a plane, but just barely. The problem wasn't landing the Lockheed 10E, but finding a small island like Howland in the middle of the Pacific would be like looking for a needle in the proverbial haystack. This leg of the journey would take approximately 20 hours, assuming the weather cooperated. As promised by the White House, the Coast Guard ship Itasca was dispatched and would offer support as needed through radio communication and smoke that would be sent into the air from its chimney stacks as a way to direct Amelia to the island. The Lockheed Electra flew at an altitude of roughly 10,000 feet above the ocean. Frank Noonan charted a course with his navigation tools and maps, and Amelia concentrated on flying the plane and working the radio transmitter. The plane had been stripped to the bare metal on the inside. Seats were removed to make room for extra fuel tanks. Inside the plane, it was hot and noisy, so loud that Amelia and Fred would have to communicate by passing each other notes to convey information. A special treat for Amelia on this marathon flight would be when she had a chance to crack open a can of her favorite tomato juice or maybe have a sandwich. She would have to stay in touch with Lae, New Guinea for information until she got close enough to the Itasca to pick up their signal. She would check in every 30 minutes and give her location, always ending her messages with, "All is A-OK." At one point, she stopped talking on the radio and just started whistling to let them know she was still there. By 5 p.m., she had dropped her altitude to 7,000 feet so she could get under the cloud cover. The Lockheed was flying at 170 miles an hour. As day turned into night, radio transmission continued, getting stronger all the time. Fred Noonan was also a sailor and was well versed in navigating by the stars, and the night sky gave Amelia's eyes a rest from the bright Pacific sun. By 6 a.m., the Itasca received word from Earhart that she was just 200 miles from the island. The ship sent up a billow of smoke to give Earhart a marker, but she said she couldn't see it. At 6:45 a.m., the Navy received a message from Earhart stating that she was only 100 miles from Howland and was quickly running out of fuel. As the radio operator on the ship tried to tune Amelia in, he quickly found that he could hear her, but she didn't seem to be responding to him.
Itasca, we are on line 157 by 337, flying north and south. We are on you but cannot see you. Itasca, please reply.
At this point, America's most famous aviatrix was about 1,000 feet above the ocean. She was exhausted and her fuel gauge was sitting on empty. If Amelia Earhart was going to survive her latest adventure, she was going to have to find that tiny island with the landing strip in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and fast.